Let's go, man.
All right, we are going. Welcome back to the podcast. Brad Miller is here from the Cancer and Comedy Podcast. You can see it there in the background. Now, Brad retired after a 43-year career as a pastor, and then he was diagnosed with cancer, so he has created the Cancer and Comedy Podcast to take bad into a good and put his personality into it and have a greater message and kind of have this intersection with hope and humor and life transformation and your belief system and humor and just all these things combined, which makes a fun soup, a fun mix of just unexpectability and adventure. So, Brad, glad to be speaking with you.
Well, Robert, awesome to be with you here on Marker of the Day. It's a thrill. I'm looking forward to serving your audience.
And that goes both ways because I am here to talk about you and what makes you tick and jump into your uniqueness. So we introduced you a little bit, but as far as you and like your elevator pitch and what you're all about in your own words, what makes you unique? What kind of turns you on and what's your passion these days?
Well, Robert, I had the experience at Christmas time of a little more than a year ago, December of 2022. I was cruising along pretty good. I had just retired, as you mentioned, from ministry. Then I got this phone call after several runs of tests that I had cancer, prostate cancer, and that kind of wrecked my world for a minute. I had to laugh to keep from crying, and but I shortly after that I spent some time with my two granddaughters, ages at that time 5 and 2, and we just did the bowling and arcade thing and did the Happy Meals at McDonald's and just had a great grandparent-grandchild time. And I had a vision of those two girls, not 5 and 2, but like 21 and 18. And I knew if I wanted to see them grow up, I had to do some things and some changes. And that meant to reframe my life, physical health being one of them, spiritual health being another, but also what can I do to make a contribution to others? I've been podcasting since 2012, 12 years now, and been in pastor ministry before that. And I had a doctoral degree in life transformation or transformational leadership. And I loved comedy and kind of a student of comedy and things like that. I'm not I'm just known as the dad joke guy around our family. But at any rate, so I just kind of put those things together and said, what can I do? Created the Cancer and Comedy Podcast, which we launched in 2023 to kind of combine, I call it to offer something for people impacted by cancer with a message of hope and humor. And so we've had a lot of fun doing that. We've been there for several months now. I got a co-host who works with me, been able to interview a lot of cool people, including some comedians, and it's been a great experience. And I'm hoping to been able to serve a lot of people already with that message of hope and humor.
I love it, hope and humor, and it's good that you're doing it. And I'm even I don't know, like this whole topic of cancer, right? I think about it so much, even though I think like in the coming years or coming decades, it's going to happen, right? It'll happen to, if you live long enough, it'll happen to us. It'll happen to the people that we love. And it's kind of a creepy, scary subject. And I can see how just getting the humor worked into it makes it a little more digestible because you can't let it win, you can't ignore it,
Yeah.
but we somehow need to kind of come at it from an angle. And so can you maybe tell us about just like the difficulties that you've seen as far as just talking about it, dealing with it? Because it's, even though you use humor, it is kind of a heavy subject.
Well, of course it is. Hey, Robert, think about it. There is probably virtually no one in my life or in your life who's not been impacted in some way by cancer, either themselves or a family member, co-worker, somebody in their life's been impacted by cancer. And every time you hear that word, it's got a boom, gloom and doom and depression that go with it. And it feels like for many people, when you first hear it's like a kind of like a death sentence, and it's deep and dark. And that's pervasive, this whole thing, Robert, about isolationism and loneliness and depression. It's pervasive in our culture right now. So what do you do to fight against it? Well, there's several things that you can do, but you have to go through, I believe, a process that you can do of taking, I call it the ACTS plan, the ACTS plan. You take action is one thing. You just got to get off your rear end and do something about it. The C is to connect with a higher power, which is your spiritual life or meditation, things like this. The T is your thinking process, your strategies, and the S is how do you serve others. And I've used this process in my ministry and counseling for a long time, but I applied it to my own life here. And so for my case, it was okay. I do not want to live in a place of gloom and doom and dread. I want to take action because I want to have fulfillment in my life no matter what. In fact, I worked out my own personal credo about this, which basically says that cancer will not define me, but it will refine me, which means changes me and change that to serve others. So I'm using all these things here. And the format I'm using is a podcast because I'm familiar with that. And I just came out of ministry to speaking to people every week. And I felt like I need to speak to more people. And why not give people a message of hope and humor? Because humor has been shown to be an effective means to help people to deal with difficult things. When they have difficult things in their life, including cancer, humor has been shown to be helpful. And I want to be helpful.
Wonderful. And I think you're so right there that you think of the people that kind of get through life a little easier. They know when to bring out the humor and use it as an ingredient. And even when you kind of mention your ACT system here, what comes to mind is like when you think about like a strategy, right? You think that there's multiple tools in the toolbox and you use different combinations of ones to get you by. Like if you think if you're like getting in your car and you're driving to the airport, well, what's your strategy to drive to the airport? You think, well, here's what I'm going to do as far as like if there's roadblocks and obstacles and how to get there in time and how to get the gas tank. And you think of, well, what's the opposite of a strategy? Is just having like one singular tool, right? If you just had like just a hammer just to get your way, that's kind of the opposite of a strategy. And so in order to get through this difficult thing called cancer, you have multiple tools in the toolbox, like having the higher power connection. And also, so by having this kind of podcast, it's sort of like a virtual support system, right? You mentioned a few minutes ago here that it's so easy to be like isolated these days for so many reasons, right? But I mean, social media and the internet was supposed to bring us closer together, kind of separated us. But the way maybe to get some of that back is to tune in and get the information and tune into a podcast, especially one such as yours. And so to give people kind of an idea of your show, what's cool about a podcast is you have a whole universe, right? And you have different guests and different approaches. Yeah. So like as far as the episodes that you've put out, is there one that is noteworthy or a guest you feel like talking about just to kind of give us a taste of what you created?
Well, yeah, I think one of the ones that I think really embody a lot of what we're about is I had a professional comedian come on my podcast, and he also spoke at a live event that I did, and his name's Rick Roberts. And Rick is a nationally known comedian. He travels the country on the clean comedy circuit, which basically is a circuit of comedy clubs and shows and churches that basically, they've committed to being clean in their language and so on. But he was in the movie called Mayberry Man, which is kind of a remake of the Andy Griffith show, and he does a Barney Fife character and this type of thing. A lot of fun. And he came on my show and in the interview. But the thing I really want to have him on there for is because he is also a survivor of prostate cancer, as I am. In fact, he had surgery just about a year before I did. And so he incorporates that story of overcoming and coping with cancer as a part of his show. And so we got to see that in the podcast episode where he relates some very funny and hilarious situations, how people treated him, and just some scenarios with his family and so on. But he also had some very poignant moments about how he had to deal with some scary moments in the hospital and some situations where it was not so fun, but he was able to utilize humor to get through it. And then fortunately enough, a month or so after we had him on the podcast, he came to our community where I live in Indianapolis, and he did a live show for us to raise some money for cancer. And it was fantastic. We had a full house at the venue that we had, and he was able to share that in a very personal way. So we do that. So we had him on the show, and that's a real embodiment of that. But we've also had people in other walks of life, like medical doctors, people in the mental health world, other authors, and people who have business people who have got through cancer, but people basically have a message of an uplifting message. When we do our podcast episodes, Robert, it's not always like, ha ha, he, he comedy. It's sometimes it's a comedy as an uplifting opposite to the tragedy of life. It's kind of like, the drama mask one with the drama mask with the frown and so on, the other drama mask with the smile, tragedy and comedy. It's kind of like that. We kind of play in that area in between those. So, but his name is Rick Roberts, and you can find him. I think he's about episode number 11 of our podcast, and I certainly can get that to you later on, the actual number of the podcast. But it's available. Rick Roberts, RIK ROBERts. RETRS, Rick Roberts.
Wonderful, Rick Roberts. And so I like what you said here about how it's not 100% laughs. It's just you use the humor, the comedy to kind of counterbalance the depressiveness of it. And I'm always kind of just I'm not really like studying it per se, but I'm always like kind of listening when I'm kind of like, is there something I can learn about using humor to kind of add more depth, right? To make things more interesting, to make things more entertaining. But then I find this whole subject of comedy to be like the more you look into it, the more you study it, the less you understand and the less it makes sense. And so can you speak to that a little bit, just as far as maybe like honing your comedy skills just for the purposes of like being a better podcaster, presenter, teacher, and like are there any sort of do's and don'ts you've discovered?
Well, I think the essence of the comedy is empathy, part of empathy about the situation. Well, I like to take the positive approach to comedy. There are people, who are kind of cutting and people who put people down. I like the positive kind of approach to it. It's empathetic storytelling and seeing the odd, quirky things of life, and how you can turn them into something funny. I'll give you one funny story. We had a great guest on our podcast who is he's an actor and in musicals, and he's in all kinds of musicals. Uh, he was in Hairspray, a traveling group of Hairspray. But anyhow, as a young man, age 25, I believe, he got a terrible form of cancer, and he tells this hilarious story about how he was in his room undergoing chemotherapy and such. And basically, he got nauseous to a degree that was ridiculous. And he just said his mother was there, and it was a pretty gross story, but he told it in such a funny way that his vomiting, which was gross in anybody's thinks, was a hilarious story about how it was just like an alien life form or whatever. And just he turned what was gross and terrible into something humorous in his life. And so you learn from those things and you get a different twist on it. That's certainly what Rick Roberts did in his deal. A lot of comedians, Robert, have this dark side to them, or the situation where they've had to deal with some really difficult things. There's a comedian who was on Saturday Night Live named Vanessa Bayer, who is a person I really want to get on my podcast. And she has a situation where she was a childhood victim of leukemia, and basically throughout her high school years was basically in bed, and she used humor to get through that. And also her friends came to her bed. So she makes that a part of her foundation. She ended up on Saturday Night Live and so on. And there's another comic named Mike Bergiglia, who has a television, a Netflix special on right now called The Old Man by the Pool. And a lot of it's about death and about disease, about some of his family members who passed away. Seeing things in a different light. Because if you stay stuck in the gloom and doom, and we like to call it, the phrase we like to use on our podcast and when we talk to people is turning the grim to a grin. Because you hear that word cancer, it's grim, it's bad. You immediately think of, like in my case, I thought about, I am never going to see my granddaughters grow up. But the grin was that they were laughing and giggling, and there being two little girls having fun, pulling my beard and things. They didn't care. They didn't know that I was sick with cancer. But I knew that I wanted to see them. But I want to turn that around, man. Different perspectives. I think the humor perspective is something really helpful. And I like to call it being lifted up. Even if it's just a moment, you get a moment of being lifted up. We like to call our listeners, for instance, lifter uppers. Because even though you have a focus then not on the gloom and doom, but a focus on being lifted up and being a resource to lift other people up. And we like to think Cancer and Comedy Podcast is one of the resources people can use to lift up other people.
I love that, and I like your various examples there of saying, well, there's a situation that you're in, and you kind of have to find maybe I'll do a lot of mental work to find a better perspective, find a new twist on it, and then there's humor in there in just having a crazy stance on things. And a lot of what you're mentioning here is to search for the story and search for your own story. That way, it can be sort of a self-expression. You're not just spitting out little one-liner jokes or little facts. It's like in a way expressing your own self in disguise. And it kind of makes me think of how when we think of us too as marketers as well, we're kind of trying to take the boring and make it interesting, right? Like if
Yeah,
someone
don't be
is
boring.
selling.
Tell a great story, man. You've got to. Everybody's got a great story. I know just a little bit about your story. You know how you got through situations in life. I know you broke your arm badly one time and stuff like that, and you got through it. And everybody's got a story, man. Let's get those stories out and let's see not only the difficult parts which we all have, but let's look for the bright parts and to illuminate them and to help us to deal with the dark parts. There's so much darkness in the world, man. So much darkness in the world, and things like depression and loneliness are almost that's an epidemic, and let's do something about it. And I like to call it this kind of the CPA approach a little bit to things and how I like to do things. And the C stands for compelling, and so compelling cancer is compelling. It gets your attention in that way. And the P is for being positive. You choose and how you're going to look at it. You can look at the positive side, and the A is attention getting, and that's what a podcast does and other things like that. It's calling attention to it. And so that's what I like to do, man. Call attention to something that's worth calling attention to.
Wonderful. And I can kind of also get we're both a couple of Ray Edwards fans, right? And Ray
Yeah.
is good about coming up with the acronyms with the technology. And it's also a lot of fun because that kind of becomes your brand and that becomes kind of your podcast content and your book content. And it's also when you kind of make the acronym and you memorize it and you repeat it and you express it, it becomes something that catches on. And so kind of on that subject, as far as the marketing, right? The business building,
And by the way, Ray was a guest on my podcast as well. But he was a guest in Cancer Comedy.
So yeah, so it's like you by having this kind of umbrella subject, you can like tap into all these different kinds of people, including I guarantee at some future date Vanessa Bayer and maybe even Mike Birbiglia. But so as far as like you said, you mentioned that you're growing the podcast, you're inviting guests, you're doing events, you're getting the awareness out. What sort of difficulty do you have to share with us as far as like growing this thing and building your audience? Is there any like kind of fun stories to share there about some failures or successes and just getting attention?
Well, I think it's a challenging time to build an audience. I really do. You got to not only raise your hand, as it were, but you kind of have to, jump up and down and scream and yell a little bit to get some attention. And I believe you can get some positive attention because there's so much noise out there. In order to cut through the clutter, you've got to be not only a little bit distinctive and a little bit different, but you have to have, in my opinion, a message that is compelling to cut through things. So it's not just, yeah, hey, I'm a good guy or I'm a smart like guy or whatever it is, but I have a message that makes a difference. And so the challenges have been continually to put a message out there consistently that is compelling and it gets the word out. I've got my own personal goals. I want to, have a break 1,000 downloads per episode, and I'm on my way towards that. But we're not there yet. And I want to, have a good sized mailing list and all those kind of markers. But in order to do that, you still got to be consistent and you got to be compelling. Compelling means you got to go deep in yourself. You go deep into your guest and to deep into the stories. My co-host and I, we do research. I have a co-host. She's a breast cancer survivor. I'm a prostate cancer warrior survivor, and we talk about our own personal stories. But we also talk to the people. Everybody we talk to has some story that's compelling that got them through their situation. So I think you got to keep at it. Bang! You got to be out there every week and on a very consistent basis to put something out there. And what I'm doing also, Robert, is I'm trying to look at things a little differently than just the podcast medium only. I've been getting into television here in our local community. And so I was able to, because the story is about cancer, I was able to be on local television. And one of the local television stations I worked with also is a part of a national network. And so I was on the TV about 4 or 5 times in the lead up to our big comedy show that we had, and which was also a benefit to raise money for cancer. And so we were able to be coast to coast. We were in Sacramento, California, out in your neighborhood, to Charlotte, North Carolina, and a couple of cities in Florida on a national network because the show was nationally syndicated. and we got good publication here locally in newspapers, radio, podcast networks, all that kind of thing. But and also locally in the healthcare community, the cancer community, the comedy community. But you know what that also meant? It meant initially, Robert, me personally had to go bang on doors, make phone calls, write those emails, do everything it took. And I had to spend a lot of energy and time at a time when I didn't always feel that good, physical health wise, but I still had to do it. So the downfall, just like we're launching a rocket, is it takes a lot of energy to get this thing off the ground, and then you still got to spend energy to do it. So it kind of in my case, it didn't shoot off like a rocket, but it got a good solid foundation start. And what we did is we did this local big event, a big comedy show. We also had a podcast conference here as well the same day, because we had a venue, and we did some other stuff along that line, meaning we brought in Dave Jackson, who's known for, he is a well-known podcast coach, brought him in. So we had a bunch of people come in for a podcast conference for 5 or 6 hours. We had brought in a well-known, national known comedian who brought in people from all around to be a part of his show. And we did it all live stream. So we had 3 live events going on in the same day. You focus on that one day to get a good start. But now what are we gonna do? You got to hang on and build on that momentum. So it's a constant struggle. It takes a lot of work. I can be honest with you, Robert, it takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. And but that's why I got to be here for it, because I got to be compelled myself by the big why of cancer, that I want to do something that makes a difference. And so we got connected with the Stand Up to Cancer folks, which has a national TV show. We were able to donate some money there. We're now on their network as well. I'm also had the opportunity now. I got a meeting this week where I might be featured on our local television station on a monthly basis, doing a coping with cancer segment. So it's led me some new avenues, some new roads, but it still means working at it hard. So I guess that's the downfall. If you're sick, a little bit like I am, I'm doing much better now, but you still got to have the energy, spend the energy, and get after it, and build a team too. I can go on and on about everything you got to do, but it starts with one person with a vision. And that's what happened to me. But build a team and people will come.
Those are some wonderful insights that we need to be like, I mean, so many good things you're mentioning here, right? Building a team, but then also this whole idea of always be networking and always be open to these opportunities. And I imagine that there is this element of, I mean, like 90% doesn't even work out, right? As far as like all the doors you're knocking and all the reach outs you're doing and all the people you're talking to, so much of it doesn't work out, but you continue because of that little percentage that kind of grows your show and helps others and gets the message out. And so what I'm getting from kind of digesting what you're saying here is how important it is to be consistent. And consistent means, putting in way more than you think that you need to in order to get your reach out there. And so there's a lot here to think about as far as you're also saying to not let ourselves get boxed into just being a podcaster, right? To if there's any kind of publicity that you can do, a live event, help someone else out, some kind of charity thing, some sort of TV thing, don't just limit yourself to the podcasting, and make your show this kind of obsession times 10 that you have going on for you. Because otherwise, if you just kind of halfway do it, if you just put a tiny bit into it, if it's something you visit sometimes, it's not going to work out and it's not going to have the result that you really want and need to have. And so as far as in the last few minutes of our conversation here, right, you're all about the cancer and the comedy, and we talked about the growing the business and kind of your struggles. But as far as just a real quick blip about like the cancer awareness, is there anything that you think maybe is not discussed enough about like cancer and testing and taking action? Like, what is the message about cancer?
Well, one of you just mentioned there is you got to get tested on a regular basis. I probably would, a month or so after I retired, I had my annual checkup with my doc and I was feeling fine, but my PSA levels, which test your prostate, were elevated. He sent me off to urologist, a bunch of tests, but I never felt any discomfort. Okay. But it's because it was caught. Testing is huge. Okay. So there is the testing piece. If that's kind of the medical piece, you got to get it done. You got to consider all the alternatives. There was several different treatment processes I could have chosen in some cases, but you got to be tested. You got to care for yourself enough to do that. But another aspect of it, and this is what I really try to play up on, given my own background in ministry and mental health and so on, and the spiritual life, is you got to pay attention to the inner life, whatever that means for you. Spiritual life, emotional health, your relationships, all that kind of stuff. That comes back to some things we're talking about, comedy and so on. That's a part of your mental health picture. Do not ignore it. When I talk about compelling is an emotional thing, man. That is what you are moved. We are moved to do stuff by what goes into our gut, our emotions. And so do not deny that. So many people, and I did this too, go through some stages when you get cancer. You go through kind of devastation, and you go through some denial and some depression and so on. But if you stay stuck there, then you're in trouble. So what you need to do is to take the action, and my ACTS plan helps people do that. Take action, connect to higher power, think a strategy, serve others with love. And so I believe that this the mental health piece is huge here. So two things: take care of your physical body, and also care for your mental health, your emotional health, with something that's compelling to you.
Wonderful. And for me, that ties back into your earlier message about the depth, right? We were talking about depth as far as if you meet someone, you have a conversation, you do a podcast, dive deep into the real issues. When you're branding your business or you're thinking about your message or the big picture, don't just visit it on the surface. Make sure you're really getting deep. And then as far as your mental health and your physical health, don't ignore these issues. And especially with the mental health, it's easy to be around negative people, and it's easy to take in all this negativity. And we have to maybe sometimes be counterintuitive and take in the positive messaging, because it's like a garbage in, garbage out situation. And taking in the positivity includes for sure tuning into the Cancer and Comedy podcast. So can you tell us, Brad, about just some next steps here, some call to action? Since as you said, we both like Ray Edwards, we like the copywriting, and what's the point if you have this message, but you don't tell them what to do at the end? So as far as jumping into the Cancer and Comedy podcast, what's the URL, and where should people also go in general after our discussion today?
Well, thank you for this opportunity, Robert, to be on Marker of the Day. I appreciate your work so much. But my calling, man, is to help that person out there who says that, yeah, I got cancer, something else bad's happened to me, but daggone it, I'm not done yet. And I just need some tools and some help to get me through. Well, I've got a doctoral degree in transformational leadership, 43 years of ministry experience, and I like to laugh. I can help you, and I'm surrounding myself with other people who can. You start by going to cancerandcomedy.com, and you can connect up to the podcast there. You can follow us there. We've got ways to follow us, both on Apple and other places that you could follow us. But particularly, I want you to get some resources for you. You've heard me mention the ACTS plan, ACTS, action, connection to higher power, think with discipline, and then to serve others with love. I can give you a course on that, a free course. You just simply go to cancerandcomedy.com/free, and that's all you do. And I hope you put it in your show notes, and you'll get a 5 audios session course there, which outlines the ACTS plan. It's going to be helpful to you. It's going to help you to develop what I call your personal cancer coping credo, which is your statement, which is going to help carry you through. cancerandcomedy.com/free. And join me every week, because we have a lot of fun, and you're going to learn something if you come to Cancer and Comedy and check out our podcast.
Wonderful. cancerandcomedy.com/free. And I like what you said there about how sometimes you just need some different tools that you maybe aren't aware of or haven't been using it yet in order to conquer this kind of really serious problem and to get through it. And it's like when you're taking a test in school and you're on question number 36 and you're like, well, I learned this one, 8 weeks ago. You don't learn it all at once. And sometimes it just takes someone saying one little tidbit and you're like, man, that helped me. And you think years later, and you're like, someone said just something offhandedly on a podcast or in a support group or something like that. And I picked that up and that really got me through. And so cancerandcomedy.com is the place to go. And as we wind down our conversation here, Brad, you have all this experience, right? You have the 43 years and the personal experience. As far as like a quotable sound bites, quote, or lesson. Does anything come to mind to really help us out to just put a cap on our conversation as far as a quote or lesson that jumps out at you?
Well, here's where I based everything on for me. I mentioned I'm a retired pastor. So the first resource I went was to the Bible and the book of Proverbs. It says, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." I know a lot of people have a crushed spirit. What the Bible says and what I'm saying to you is have a cheerful heart because that is good medicine. So that's what I leave your folks with. A cheerful heart is good medicine.
Wonderful. And if someone out there is saying, well, that's a good message, but easier said than done, well, your next step is to go to cancerandcomedy.com and get your head refocused, get your head right, and just start taking in these lessons. And so that way you can get on the path and get your thinking right and get your body right. And that way you can live a long and productive life, no matter your age, no matter your health situation. There's always time left to do better. You can take it one day at a time. So go to cancerandcomedy.com. We will see you there. Brad Miller, wonderful speaking with you.
Robert, what a pleasure and an honor to be on Marketer of the Day.